I've slept in her house, and I've eaten the cakes of her sister, who owns 3 sweet shops in Belgrade. So she's exactly the kind of person you want to get to know, just only to get at her sister. She's a distinguished practitioner, also a very influential teacher and mentor to the rising generation. She's worked extensively in zones of conflict and has thought deeply about the issues that concern the conscience. So with great pleasure,
dictator, Milosevic, the same. So for years and years while he was alive, and even until today, I'm starting my presentations with I'm Dijana Milosevic, no relations to dictatorship. So to speak about identity, of course, first is our name. So when I start to speak about my identity, I have to say who I am not, in fact. And then another very strong point of identity is where you're coming from. And I'm coming from the country that used to be Yugoslavia, that split in a very violent civil war in the 90s, and that now it became Serbia eventually, but in the course of all those years, so 20 years, it changed its name many times. And I'm often telling this joke, so some of you who heard my presentation before maybe know this joke. But the joke says, like, yesterday actually we were speaking about Nokia cell phones and how great photos have been made. And so the joke is, what do Nokia cell phones and my country have in common? And so the answer is, with each new model, it becomes smaller. And so this is again. So again, speaking about identity, I'm coming from Yugoslavia that became a Republic of Yugoslavia, that became another thing, that became Republic of Serbia eventually. And so 2 pillars of our identity, or my identity, is very questioned in my case. So when I think about my identity, I have to go to my core. And of course I can say that my core as a theater artist is something that definitely is my identity. And when I think about my home, my home is here, because we have the stage, we have the lights, we have the people here and our encounter. Another part of my core, of course, is and who I am and what is my work about starts with my childhood. And don't worry, I'm not going to tell the story about my life, it will take a time. But one of the really first big memories of my childhood is about my fantasy about a group of people with whom I am doing and experiencing different adventures. And I lived that idea, that fantasy, for some years of my childhood, really going through adventure to adventure with this very special group of people, and each of the people that were in the group was an expert for something. And my family didn't want to hear about my adventures. They were like, oh, you're fantasizing all the time, you're in the dream world. So they were like, give us a break. So I went to my next neighbor, and he was a great man, and he was listening carefully and asking, so what happened yesterday? And he was really very serious about it. And so I guess he was my first audience. And this is when I understood probably importance, how do we identify our audience? And this idea of a group with whom I'm experiencing different important and incredible adventures, I think is in the core of my vision, of my dream to live my theater group that I eventually formed 20 years ago. And it's still in the core of that group, that child fantasy. Steal from Barbara from yesterday, what she did, just a part. And I will ask you to turn to your neighbor, left or right. Yes? Please do turn. And identify who is A, who is B, please. So just very quickly, A and B. And if there are like 3 people sitting together, it's okay. It was my case yesterday. It could be 2 A's, 1 B, or 2 B's, 1 A. Okay, and now for like 5 seconds, really think about your impossible dream that you are going to do. Just think about it. It could be anything. It could be my dream is to have time to walk my dog every day. Your impossible dream. And please turn back to your partners. And persons A, listen. Persons B, do say your impossible dream that you are going to do to your neighbor A, please. Now, need came our need, and this is something that I think we are discussing here, these extremely important questions about ethics and responsibility, and what do we do when we come to the conflict zones, and what do we do when we come into the context that we maybe don't know very good, and do we have right to do it, and all those questions are really very important to consider. And I would say that for me, my safety belt is that I'm working out of my wounds, or my wound, or we can translate it burning need. And I think, again, we can all identify what is the burning wound in myself. So if I go to Sri Lanka, why do I go there except that I want to help, I want to share my expertise, my vision, I want to meet people and so on. But what is my wound? What is my burning need? Of course, I'm speaking out of my own experience, and my burning need and the need of my colleagues when we started to work in 1991 and 1992 was to break denial that our people lived in, and to try to speak, to act out of guilt. Because we were in Serbia, and our government initiated the war, and our people were doing unspeakable atrocities while we were living in, on the surface, looking kind of the peaceful society. And we were hearing from our friends, relatives, and so on, because it was civil war, that atrocities had been committed in our names. But we felt very powerless, and officially, during Milosevic's time, in all media, it was denial for the first, couple of months, or even a year or 2 years of the war, that the war was happening. It was forbidden to mention it. So my wound that I wanted to speak, that I had the burning need to speak from, was to break denial and to say, like, we are now experiencing this terrible war and we are responsible for it. And so this is something that shaped the path of my group, the destiny of my group. We did it, we created the first anti-war performance, and that really shaped our lives. But I can say, of course, we are not always working out, we are not always dealing with topics of conflict and the violence. We are interested in the course of 20 years in many other topics. But what was always and is important to me and my colleagues that we share is, like, we are always trying to see what I'm burning for in this moment. So, and then we can arrange everything around that, because, like, nowadays many people there is this EU funding. It's very convenient to have a partner in the EU. Many people are approaching us, so are we going to be partners and to create the project and so on. And it's nothing wrong in that, it's fine. But my take is that I really need first to see, like, what is, like, my burning need that I would work from, and then I can find partners or accept invitations or, like, do the fundraising or go and speak to officials, politicians, and everybody else. But then I have, like, really protection, and this is like something that one can call mission, some can call it acting out of a wound or the burning need. When James said today that the culture is absolutely not something that is per se good, I cannot agree more with that, because we really lived in the country where I saw how culture and arts were misused. We had state-supported artists that really glorified the state crimes. We had artists that were really, like, pro-war, hard nationalists, and I can say that the huge responsibility for the war that happened was on artists and intellectuals. So I think it is very important to avoid this naive idea of like artists or the person from culture always doing good. I can say that I saw even good pieces or products of art that did evil. And this is something that we really have to have in our minds. We had a famous theater director that was among the best theater directors in all Yugoslavia that became the spokesman and the first man in the Milosevic's wife party, really evil party, that caused like people were missing and had been killed and tortured because of her orders and so on. He directed Shakespeare excellently. And so I can list those examples. So I think this is another thing to really consider, and this is responsibility. And this is a next part that I will speak about. We were faced with that many times. We were labeled many times coming from Serbia as like enemy, as pro-Milosevic people, because I'm Milosevic, they didn't know who we are, as people who are supporting atrocities unless or until people would see our work, and then the whole relationship would change. And that really taught me to think about responsibility. So how do we present our work? In which context are we presenting our work? Or how do we deal with the stories of the people whose stories are we presenting? And I will speak about the example of our piece, Crossing the Line. It's the piece that was based on the book Women's Side of the War, published by Women in Black. It is the feminist activist organization that is that exists worldwide, but it's very active in Belgrade and in Serbia. It's amazing, brave, uncorrupted and fantastic group of women that are really doing great things, and like their latest project is like they're visiting the sites of crimes that were committed by our people in our names. And they did many other projects, and so the book that they published, The Women's Side of the War, they invited us to help them to promote the book, because we do collaborate for many years. The book is a collection of the real stories, real testimonies by women from the whole region of ex-Yugoslavia, regardless of their age, of their education, of their ethnic background, or any other kind of background. And it's quite a historical book because for the first time in our country, the women's voice was not transformed, was not manipulated, was not used or misinterpreted, but it was presented exactly how the women spoke. So it was a huge, so they asked us to help them promote the book, and then since we are a modern theater that is using different also fields and visual arts and many other things, for us it was not possible to create kind of the classical promotion of the book with actresses reading the text, so we created a piece, and then that piece like became the real performance that we toured with Women in Black all around the region, and we toured it internationally. So I will speak a bit about it, but before that I would like you to see the little excerpt, and I will explain later why. So Joe, please, first video.
Yeah.
performed this piece, as I said, in all around the region and internationally. And what was interesting about the piece and this scene that I took as example was that it was based on particular story that I will tell you about. But of course, people didn't know what was the story that was in the base of the scene. And we asked people, so how do you perceive it? And many people said that it was about domestic violence, that it was about, obviously, violence on women, that it was about the violence that women take upon themselves, and so on and so on. And this is exactly, that led me to, again, to the amazing tool that we do have as a theater and art practitioners, and this is complexity and contradiction, that we can use in our work, because theater is able to sustain contradiction and complexity. Theater, as Erica mentioned yesterday, when it becomes too linear, too narrative, is losing organicity, losing life. And to be able to keep contradictions and complexity together at the same time, and to have the view, different views, as from yesterday, the view of the little girl that was doing flower, and many other kids were seeing all different stuff, all different images, is really something that is a huge, huge advantage of our art. This story was by a woman whose name is Anisa. She is a Bosnian woman that was captured and held in the Serbian concentration camp during the war in Bosnia, and where women specifically were tortured and raped and often killed. And her way to save her life was, she just got this idea out of blue, out of despair, that she's going to sing all the time. So she sang days and nights for days. And she was a Bosnian Muslim woman, but she chose Serbian traditional folk song, where, like, the mother is greeting her son who is going to go to the war to become the soldier. And it's a very known song. So so the soldiers there, I mean the military and paramilitary that were holding the camp, they thought she went nuts, that she was crazy. And they didn't, and because of that, they tried to beat her, but she was singing nevertheless. They tried to torture her, she was singing nevertheless. And at the end, they gave up. And she was singing, she said, for weeks, days and nights. She said that even her dreams became singing. And this is how she survived. She was not raped, she was not killed, and she was released at the end because of the change of the circumstances. And so this is the true story of that woman, and for me that story is an example of incredible two tools that I just mentioned that she used to survive, to save her life, and it was complexity and it was contradiction, because to sing in the concentration camp is really contradiction, and to sing Serbian song, being Bosnian woman, to her Serbian executioners was very complex. So she really had to know about the history and the national feel and many other things. And so using theatrical tools, she saved her life. There are many stories like her, and you can understand why I felt extremely responsible and why I felt very anxious, because I knew we were going to meet some of the women that survived, whose stories were said in that book. And this is when I learned something also that was mentioned yesterday, but I think one thing with the healing is, and Carlos Fuentes said, and I like this quotation, that the best way to heal the wound is to speak how it had been done. And so this is the first step. And then another was when we realized, when we performed this in Bosnia with a room full of people who lost their closest ones. Some of the women whose stories were in the book were present. They lost their children or spouses and so on. And so I was really thinking and asking this very important question, like what we are doing there. Are we re-traumatizing them again because people were crying? Do we have the right to do it? What are like implications, me being Serbian, presenting their stories? And all those questions actually were very present there. At the end, I was relieved when I understood that for those people, and those women specifically, it was the beginning of healing was to be able to be acknowledged in their losses. So to acknowledge the losses and to put it publicly, it was enormous act of healing for them, and I know that because they approached us. And this is, again, I am coming back to my own wound, because obviously I'm wounded because my people did something like that. I'm asking myself about responsibility. It's very complex in our country. Scars and wounds are coming from, as Barbara said yesterday, from centuries ago that were unhealed. So again, it was this like, how do we start the process of healing? Or how do we start the process of healing in the circumstances where perpetrators, many of them, have not been brought to justice? And maybe their neighbors. It's very specific in ex-Yugoslavia, I guess. It's very similar in Rwanda and other countries. So what do we do with that? And so I guess this is really important step to announce the losses. So that leads me to another title, which is subversiveness, and this is my last part. So I will present you also the short excerpt from our project Invisible City. This is the theater project that we did in public buses all around Serbia, in Norway, and now we are doing it throughout Europe. We got this EU funding for that. And the idea was, so our need or our wound was that we were brought up in the multinational, multicultural society, and we were all proud because of that. Due to the wars of nationalism, our people started to speak about being pure Serbs, which is a nonsense. Having a pure Serbian language, which is a nonsense, because Balkan and Serbia was and is the crossroad of many people, civilizations, religions, and so on. And suddenly, from the fact that we were very proud about, many people started to be ashamed of that, and many neighbors whose origin was not pure Serbian started to hide, started to really be ashamed about that, or simply they felt fear to go openly public saying that they were not pure Serbs. So we addressed that topic using the bus, and we wanted to speak about our different neighborhoods and neighbors that made up our culture and our city, through telling the histories of those people related to the parts of the city where bus was passing. And we chose, and so subversiveness was in two ways. One was that we decided instead to speak about harsh histories. We decided to speak about the beauty, richness, and really like a fantastic fact that each of those cultures is bringing with themselves. So we decided to celebrate our differences instead of speaking about the stories about oppression and fear and so on. And this was why, because we live in the violent society, and we were aware we were going to the public bus, and we were aware we need somehow to protect ourselves. On the other hand, we needed really to open up the people. And another subversive idea was how to present forbidden languages, forbidden ethnical groups like Albanians in our case. It's a huge thing to speak Albanian publicly. So we found the autobiography of a very famous Albanian actor, and an actor spoke his words, doing his character from the very famous movie. So people were a bit puzzled, a bit confused, but they got it. They got the Albanian language, but in the frame of the culture. And so, we made it. Since we are running out, I'm running out of time, can we see the second video, please?
Na ovaj dan mi se nekako najviše cveće vidano.
So this is about Roma community, and you can see obviously by chance we have Roma people in the bus. The bus audience was like just passengers, ordinary passengers. So our goal is to reach to the passengers, not to the invited theater audience. And so we also wanted to bring back dignity to Roma people, because cliché was that they were beggars and stealers and criminals. So we wanted to present their culture, their music, the legend, how the Roma people came to this world, and so on. And we can stop here, Joe, because we don't have time. Thank you. So with this project, we are still traveling to Europe in the buses, and it of course brought us lots of joy, but what really moved me in my country, in my city, was that people were leaving the buses with a sentence like, what did they do to us? And meaning like what did wars, politicians or whoever did to us that once we were so proud because of such diversity. So to finish my presentation, I would just like to say that here it was mentioned the unknown territory, and I think it is very important when we are doing our work in different contexts or in different zones to understand and to acknowledge that we are coming to unknown and that it is okay. And that it is, of course, we should do our homeworks. Of course, we should prepare. Of course, we should know political, historical, and other contexts. But what is really important is to allow ourselves to say one simple, I don't know. And with that question, I'm finishing this presentation. Thank you.